Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Welcome back after this coffee break. I'm glad that you're all still here. I see quite a lot of you are still present during this session, and I understand why. I mean, everybody wants to learn about adaptation and economic development. I have the honor to introduce my long-term colleague and co-partner in the business since the beginning, actually, since the very early start. Even before we started our business, we already met each other during my studies at the TU Delft and Rutger's PhD studies at the TU Delft. So here to introduce Rutger. You've seen him a lot in the recent days. He is one of the most visionary, most positive-minded people I've ever met. So Rutger, take the floor.
Thank you very much, Carina. Yeah, the early days, 2006, a long time ago. But today we'll talk about adaptation and economic development. Some very interesting presentations coming up. First one will be by Jagmeet Kangura and Jason Haney, both working at a very large construction and engineering company from the US. And they are also co-founder of a floating solutions initiative within the company. So that's great. Companies, renowned companies like that, also working on floating solutions and innovative housing solutions. The presentation will be about floating modular housing to address demand and affordability. This will be a pre-recorded presentation. And after 3 days, you know how it works. You go to the stage and press the play button. After the presentation, Jagmeet and Jason will be there to answer questions.
Hi, my name is Jagmeet Kangura. Today, my partner and I will be talking to you about how floating modular housing can be used to address demand and affordability. Jason and I work for Black & Veatch. We are an employee-owned global company based in the US. We help our clients plan, design, construct, and operate critical human infrastructure. The key industries that we serve are power, water, and telecom. In addition to land-based infrastructure experience, we also have extensive experience with maritime and coastal engineering. Our experience includes building liquefied natural gas plants, renewable energy, data centers, floating water treatment plants, floating energy storage, as well as mixed-use development. We are expanding our experience in mixed-use development by looking at how we can help solve the housing crisis. Globally, it is estimated that 1.6 million people lack access to affordable, adequate, and secure housing by 2025. This problem is greatest in large cities that are close to water. The key issues with the housing crisis, as we see, are that it is very hard to build housing in expensive areas. The places that are most expensive to live are also the most expensive places to build. There is also an increased demand in terms of people wanting to live by the coast. This demand is further exacerbating the problem, because there is also a lack of land available to build housing near the coast. This problem is being made worse by the climate change crisis that we are facing. Climate change has already increased the risk faced by existing homes. This will add to the existing demand for future homes as well, because the existing stock of homes is going to be reduced. Recent analysis for the US has shown that 14.6 million properties are at a substantial risk of flooding right now in 2020. Use of traditional methods like seawall is extremely expensive. In the US alone, this approach would cost around $400 billion by 2040. While affluent cities can pay for these projects, they will be too expensive for small communities. In a study that was done a little while ago, it showed that about 178 small communities, the cost of building these type of infrastructure projects would cost about $100,000 per person. Due to the high cost of building seawalls and other sorts of traditional infrastructure, we believe there is a need to redo and rethink the way we build housing. Housing in some coastal markets right now can be as high as about $1,100 per square foot. I believe that's about $12,000 per square meter. Cost to develop housing typically includes land costs, permits, city or community fees, professional services, legal fees, construction finance fees, construction labor, as well as materials. Land cost is already really high in coastal areas, and it will likely keep increasing over time. There has already been a significant increase in residential land prices in the U.S. Majority of coastal communities in California have seen increase higher than 50% in 2012 to 2017. Some have even seen increase as high as 100% or above 100%. Our proposed solution to help with the housing crisis that's going to get worse in the future is to build floating housing. Floating housing on newly built or reclaimed floating base, globally produced using modular construction methods with standard amenities and then floated to site. We would think this housing would be more near urban centers to reduce the use of individual personal vehicles and reliance more on the communal infrastructure like public transportation. Our approach will target 4 cost components to significantly reduce the cost of total housing. These targeted components include land cost, construction finance fees, construction labor, and materials. Based on our research so far, we believe the final solution will be affordable and the cost will range between $200 to $320 per square foot. Unlike traditional housing, the solution will also allow for a rapid and flexible deployment to multiple locations around the world and will reduce the development risk faced by developers. In addition to being affordable, floating housing will also be resilient to many of the natural threats faced by communities. First, floating housing will be resilient against sea level rise due to climate change, seasonal flooding, earthquakes, wildfires, extreme temperatures, as well as droughts. We also believe that floating housing can be sustainable with the use of recycled materials, reduced use of resources such as energy and water, and reduce impact on the environment by using zero-waste water discharge. Now, Jason Haney will talk to you a little bit more about the design and construction principles we believe will be used for the floating housing approach based on our experience with other floating infrastructure.
Yeah, there are several unique considerations for developing large-scale floating infrastructure. And so we've developed these guiding principles that are kind of our path forward for planning anything that is a floating infrastructure project. These include considerations for the minimization of the equipment and the footprint, or equipment because of the footprint being so small, minimizing the number and complexity of the components on the structure, minimizing the weight of the components, minimizing interconnections to avoid complexity, and ensuring that all the components are accessible for both maintenance and egress. And these guiding principles then really drive all of the key design criteria that go into a floating infrastructure project, from technology selection to selection of the shipyards, safety, classification requirements if it's classified as a vessel, to where it will be moored, and then how it will be connected to power, utilities, and dredging. These are all technical solutions or technical issues that we've faced in other floating infrastructure projects. Now, some of the barriers and challenges to floating housing specifically that we've assessed are going to be the regulation and permitting issues. So this may be a challenge in some areas, as floating housing is unique and not covered under existing rules. And so we'll have to help develop new processes and create in conjunction with the local and possibly federal authorities in an area to ensure that these can be permitted and regulated. And also, there's a challenge that these facilities won't be desirable for residents and the community won't accept it, because currently floating housing is not a culturally accepted practice all over the world. There are pockets of acceptance, but it's not universal. And finally, financing may be a challenge, as this is an esoteric asset class. It combines real estate and marine, which traditionally have not been combined. And so there's some challenges with the perceived future values, and it's unclear about the depreciation and how that will be different from real estate, from land-based real estate. So our proposed way forward is to develop a pilot project. This would include a small-scale housing development to address these barriers and help us work through these challenges. We can test the assumptions, we can develop necessary technologies, and we can create templates for the regulatory approvals to then use at other communities and with other in other areas. We'll work with development agencies and investors, host city, and other stakeholders to put together a performance and monitoring plan, which can help us improve the understanding of the remaining technology risks and then the benefits and impacts that floating housing could provide to a community or any other location. This will also help us break down the barriers of this being acceptable by residents, because it allows us something to actually show them. They can see the apartment, they can see the facility and how it fits in with the rest of the community, and it will help us with breaking down the barriers with communities, that they see that it fits in with the rest of their planning aspects of their community. In preparation for this, we've designed some design concepts using our architects at Black & Veatch. Now, to start the process, we gave them a specific set of criteria to ensure that all of the designs met codes and standards that would be approved, or at least perceived to be approved by a specific entity. And also it allowed for consistency among the designs. The design criteria listed here, just some highlights. It was a residential housing facility, a max height of 30 feet, because there's height restrictions in a lot of coastal areas. Housing units between 400 and 700 square feet, and then a platform which we told them was a floating barge with these dimensions. To minimize some of the complexity, we assumed it would be permanently moored to shore, and it would be connected to land-based utilities for water, wastewater, power, etc. And it would be in a protected harbor, so there wouldn't have to be designing considerations for extreme weather. The target market is likely singles or couples and moderate income customers in this situation. And it would include all of the standard apartment amenities, and primary access would be via gangway from the shore. No consideration for vehicular access, because it would be by public transit. And also the requirement that they use the modular construction techniques that we have proposed. And specifically, it's the California Building Code for multifamily and manufactured factory-built housing. These are some pictures of the design concepts. The rest are included in our paper, and you can find much more information if you'd like to look in more detail. Each one can be targeted to a specific residential base, from retirees to young couples. Each one offers different advantages. All of them, though, use the modular construction techniques and the same floating barge. So it allows us the opportunity to show specific design concepts to not only residents, but then also prospective communities that would like a pilot program in their neighborhood. Thank you for allowing us to present floating modular housing to address demand and affordability.
Thank you very much, Jason and Jagmeet, for this wonderful presentation. Very impressive work that you have been doing, and I think it's great news for the emerging floating communities industry that a big and renowned company such as Black & Veatch is also working on this. There is room for some questions. I'm looking in the chat if there are people from the audience who would like to ask something to you. But in the meantime, I also have a question. So you've done a lot of work on this, and I think also you've brought in a lot of experience from other applications, floating applications to the floating housing. What do you see as, what's your plan in moving this forward, looking to the future and towards application of your concepts?
Mm-hmm. I think what we're doing, so in the US, we have been going to different regions where we only do some traditional work, talking to cities and communities to see how a solution could help meet their housing goals. So we're doing that at the same time, also talking to some financing partners, people who finance some of the other projects that we worked on. We ourselves as a company, like one of the floating FLNG projects that we worked on, not only did we build and construct it, we also funded a part of it. So we're trying to find some kind of some more creative ways to see if we can get a project funded and built. As we've learned from the past few days, I think something actually has to be built for us to see what it looks like. That way we can also see what the risks are during the whole life cycle, not just the very beginning, but to the people that live on it, and also like, what the impact it has on the environment. So our goal actually is to see if we can get the funding and get a pilot built. It could be maybe 15 housing units. So that's what we're working on right now in the US, and potentially looking at other markets as well, just because we do have the advantage of having a worldwide global reach as a company.
Excellent. And what are your experiences so far? How do people respond to your proposals and when you try to?
So I think we've done a lot. We did an internal survey for people that work at Black & Veatch. We have thousands of employees that actually live in coastal cities. We've talked to cities, and most people think it's a great idea. They're very welcoming of it. So I don't think we've had any negative feedback. Most people are intrigued by the idea, and they think that it's maybe a little bit ahead of its time in some communities. I spoke with many construction companies in Mumbai in that market. So for there, it's definitely a little bit ahead of the time. And in the U.S., we've gotten pretty positive feedback from the people that we work with. The main challenges, as we pointed out, is the regulatory barrier and the way, if you build something, the way like the barriers work out. We can have initial conversations with entities, and we have done that, but usually they don't provide you with actual feedback till you submit plans for permitting or approval. So we have to go through that cycle, and I think that's a concern for us and other people. So we want to, use the kind of the positive reception that we do have from the community and cities, and leverage that into getting some goodwills to help through the regulatory barriers that we'll be having later on. But so far, people have been positive. I think Jason has had the same experience when he's spoken with people. Yeah,
and working with specific communities, it all depends on that specific community's needs and where they see the possibilities are. So, we've determined that some of them are going to be more open because their housing needs are more critical, and they can see the potential more than, the possible drawbacks, where there's other ones that, the not in my backyard or not in my water are going to be more prevalent regardless of their housing needs. So finding a place that's acceptable and is willing to take a pilot because of their housing needs and the great challenges they have, I think will be key to then showcase to other communities it can be done.
And I think one of the benefits that this solution actually has inherently is that they don't have to commit to having it there for 20 years or 30 years like a traditional project. They could just say, you could have this there for a year or two while we try it out. So they don't have to commit. I think that is a benefit. I would say another thing that we've learned, we've talked to people kind of like us who traditionally live on land. And then we've talked to people who work in the marine world, who've been lawyers in the marine world, and they actually look at the water very differently than when we talk to people who live on land, and they look at water kind of as something to be preserved and saved as a great resource. But people who work in the marine industry, they see it as a working place because it has been a working industry that's been around since the beginning of the world. So they view water very differently, and how they approach different sorts of projects very differently than say if you talk to a city who thinks maybe it'll be a little bit odd to have housing on the water. But if you talk to the marine folks or people at ports, they see it as a working industry, so they have less hesitancy about moving forward.
I think we really have the same experience here. Also with the floating pavilion, the only way how we could get permit was by having it in this location for 5 years. But now it has been there for 10 years because everyone likes it. But that's often the way how you can get things started. And I also really agree with you that the maritime industry has so much more experience and so much more about these kind of floating concepts. So there's a lot to learn from there as well. So Jason and Jagmeet, thank you very much for your contribution to this conference. Great to have you here. I would like to talk longer with you, but unfortunately we need to move on to our next presenter, Benjamin Ketper. But I hope you stay with us for a while, and looking forward to talk to you again in the future.
And we will.
Anybody can reach out to us directly. We are more than happy to have conversations that are for a reason, or just random conversations, because it's a very interesting area of topic for us. So
absolutely, everyone, please do so, because that's one of the reasons why we organize this conference, to make more connections. So thank you very much.